The crack of Detective Ryan Crawford's boot against Judge Diane Mitchell's ribs echoed through Courtroom 7A, like a gunshot silencing every voice, freezing every breath. In that moment of shocking violence, as the distinguished black judge stumbled against her bench, Crawford had no idea he'd just signed his own death warrant. Not literally, but something far worse awaited him. His entire empire of corruption, built on the broken bodies of innocent black youth, was about to come crashing down in the most spectacular way imaginable. Stay with me until the end of this incredible true story, and drop a comment about which city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story of justice travels. The morning of October 15th started like any other in the Hamilton County Courthouse, but by noon it would become the day that changed everything. Detective Ryan Crawford walked through the courthouse doors at 8:47 a.m. with the swagger of a man who believed himself untouchable. His polished badge caught the fluorescent lights as he moved, each step deliberate, each gesture calculated to remind everyone of his power. For 15 years, Crawford had built his reputation on fear, not the respectful caution given to good officers, but the bone-deep terror reserved for predators who wore badges. Judge Diane Mitchell sat in her chambers, reviewing the case files for the morning's hearings. At 52, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had fought for every inch of respect she commanded. The first black woman to serve as a judge in Hamilton County, she had endured death threats, vandalized cars, and whispered slurs in courthouse hallways. But she had never bent, never broken. This morning, however, she was looking at something that made her hands tremble slightly, not with fear, but with barely contained rage. The file before her contained the arrest report for Keisha Williams, a 15-year-old honor student from Martin Luther King High School. According to Crawford's report, Keisha had been caught with suspected narcotics during a routine traffic stop. But Judge Mitchell had done her homework. Keisha Williams was the valedictorian of her sophomore class, a volunteer at the local food bank, and the daughter of Angela Williams, a nurse who worked double shifts at Hamilton General Hospital. The suspected narcotics, Crawford claimed to have found the lab results buried deep in the supplemental reports, showed they were aspirin tablets for Keisha's documented migraines. Another one. Judge Mitchell whispered to herself, adding Keisha's file to a locked drawer in her desk, a drawer that had been growing heavier with similar cases over the past 6 months. The courtroom began filling at 9:30 a.m. The Williams family sat in the third row, Angela clutching her daughter's hand so tightly that both their knuckles had gone white. Keisha, despite her academic achievements, looked terrified. She wore her best dress, the one she'd worn to last year's academic awards ceremony, but now it hung on her frame. She'd lost 12 pounds since her arrest 3 weeks ago, unable to eat from anxiety. "Mom, what if they don't believe me?" Keisha whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the filling courtroom. "Judge Mitchell is fair, baby. She'll see the truth." Angela replied, though her own voice carried a tremor of uncertainty. They both knew that fairness was often a luxury black families couldn't afford in courtrooms like this. At 9:45 a.m., Detective Crawford entered through the side door, and the atmosphere shifted palpably. Conversations died mid-sentence. Several black families in the gallery unconsciously leaned away from him as he passed. He was a big man, 6'3", 240 pounds of muscle that had gone slightly soft around the middle, but remained intimidating. His blonde hair was cut military short, and his blue eyes held the cold assessment of a hunter evaluating prey. Crawford took his position at the prosecution table with Assistant District Attorney Mark Brennan, a nervous man in his 30s who always seemed to be sweating when Crawford was around. Brennan had tried to question some of Crawford's arrests before, but those questions had been met with such hostile resistance from the detective and his supporters in the department that Brennan had learned to keep his mouth shut and do his job. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Diane Mitchell," the bailiff announced at exactly 10:00 a.m. Judge Mitchell entered with measured steps, her black robes pristine, her natural hair styled in a dignified crown that she wore like armor against those who thought she didn't belong here. She took her seat and surveyed the courtroom with dark eyes that missed nothing. Not the way Crawford slouched disrespectfully in his chair, not the fear radiating from the Williams family, not the way several other families in the gallery watched with a mixture of hope and resignation. We're here for the preliminary hearing in the matter of State versus Keisha Williams. Judge Mitchell began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned every word of respect she commanded. Case number 2024 CF0847. Is the prosecution ready to proceed? Brennan stood wiping his palms on his suit jacket. Yes, Your Honor. The state is prepared to present evidence that on September 22nd, the defendant was found in possession of... I'll hear from the arresting officer first. Judge Mitchell interrupted, her eyes fixed on Crawford. Detective Crawford, please take the stand. Crawford rose slowly, deliberately, making a show of straightening his tie. He walked to the witness stand with the confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times, who knew the script by heart. After being sworn in, he settled into the witness chair like a king on his throne. Detective Crawford. Judge Mitchell began, please describe the circumstances of Miss Williams's arrest. Crawford's testimony was smooth, practiced. He described conducting a routine patrol in the high crime area around Martin Luther King High School when he observed Keisha Williams engaged in what he called suspicious behavior consistent with narcotic transactions. What specific behavior did you observe? Judge Mitchell asked. The defendant was loitering near a known drug corner, Your Honor. She appeared nervous when she saw my patrol car and attempted to conceal something in her backpack. From the gallery, Angela Williams made a small sound of distress. Keisha had been waiting for the school bus, the same corner where she'd waited every day for 3 years. And what did you find in the backpack? Judge Mitchell continued. Several white pills in an unmarked container, Your Honor. Based on my training and experience, I suspected they were controlled substances. Did you field test these pills? Crawford shifted slightly. The field test was inconclusive, Your Honor, but... I have the lab report here, Judge Mitchell interrupted, holding up a document. It states definitively that the pills were aspirin, generic over-the-counter aspirin. Were you aware of these results? I haven't had a chance to review all the lab work, Your Honor. Crawford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Judge Mitchell leaned forward. Detective Crawford, this report was filed 2 weeks ago. Are you telling me you arrested a 15-year-old honor student, charged her with possession of narcotics, and haven't bothered to check whether the alleged narcotics were actually illegal drugs? The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the court reporter seemed to be holding her breath. Crawford's face flushed red. Your Honor, with all due respect, I have dozens of cases. I can't be expected to do your job. Judge Mitchell's voice cut through his excuse like a blade. To verify that you're not destroying a child's life over aspirin tablets. Your Honor. Brennan stood quickly. Perhaps we could... Sit down, Mr. Brennan, Judge Mitchell commanded without looking at him. Her eyes remained locked on Crawford. Detective, I'm looking at your arrest history. In the past year, you've arrested 47 black teenagers from the Martin Luther King High School district. Would you care to guess how many white teenagers you've arrested from Hamilton Prep, which is only 3 miles away? Crawford's hands gripped the arms of the witness chair. I go where the crime is, Your Honor. The crime... Judge Mitchell's voice rose slightly. According to the Department of Education's data, Hamilton Prep has had 16 drug-related expulsions in the past year. Martin Luther King High has had 3. Yet you've made 0 arrests at Hamilton Prep and 47 at MLK High. Can you explain this discrepancy? Those are internal school matters. At Hamilton Prep they are. At MLK High, you seem to treat them as criminal matters. Why is that, Detective Crawford? The tension in the courtroom was electric. Several people in the gallery were recording with their phones, despite the bailiff's earlier warnings against it. Crawford's face had gone from red to purple. I don't appreciate what you're implying, Your Honor, Crawford said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Facts that show a clear pattern of racial bias in your arrest record. Judge Mitchell picked up another file. Let's talk about Malik Thompson. The name hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Several people gasped. Angela Williams pulled Keisha closer. Crawford went very still, the kind of stillness that precedes violence. "I don't know what that has to do with this case," Crawford said carefully. "Malik Thompson, age 17, honor student, full scholarship to Howard University, shot and killed during what you described as a routine traffic stop gone wrong 8 months ago." Judge Mitchell's voice had dropped to almost a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You claimed he reached for a weapon. No weapon was ever found. Internal Affairs cleared me of any wrongdoing. Internal Affairs, led by Captain James Morrison, your former partner and godfather to your eldest son." Judge Mitchell stood her robes billowing. "The same Captain Morrison who has personally signed off on every single one of your questionable arrests." Crawford stood abruptly, the witness chair scraping against the floor. "Your Honor, I don't have to sit here and listen to this." "Yes, Detective Crawford, you do. You're under oath in my courtroom." Judge Mitchell's voice rang with authority. "Now sit down." For a moment, Crawford stood frozen, his fists clenched, his chest heaving. The bailiff officer Jerome Washington, one of the few black officers in the courthouse, moved his hand to his service weapon, ready to intervene. But Crawford, after a long moment, sat back down. "Now," Judge Mitchell continued, returning to her seat, "I want to discuss the pattern I'm seeing here. Malik Thompson dead. Jerome Williams currently serving 5 years for cocaine possession. Cocaine that his attorney claims was planted. Marcus Davis permanently disabled after what you called necessary force during an arrest for jaywalking. Jaywalking Detective Crawford." With each name, Crawford's control slipped further. His mask of professional composure was cracking, revealing something ugly underneath. "These are all justified. David Chen." Judge Mitchell continued reading from her files. "Oh wait, that's interesting. David Chen arrested at Hamilton Prep with 2 ounces of marijuana and several tablets of MDMA. You gave him a warning and called his parents. He's now pre-med at Johns Hopkins. Tell me, Detective Crawford, what was different about David Chen?" "Every case is unique. What was different about David Chen?" Judge Mitchell repeated, her voice harder. Crawford's jaw worked silently for a moment. "He was a good kid who made a mistake. And Malik Thompson wasn't a good kid. Full scholarship to Howard, no prior record, worked part-time to support his mother after his father died in Iraq. That's not a good kid. Malik Thompson was reaching for something. According to you, the only witness. Because your body cam mysteriously malfunctioned that day, didn't it?" Crawford stood again, more violently this time. "I've had enough of this. Detective Crawford, I'm holding you in contempt if you don't sit down immediately," Judge Mitchell warned. But Crawford was beyond reason now. His carefully constructed facade had crumbled entirely. "You people always stick together, don't you?" he snarled, the mask finally off completely. The courtroom gasped collectively. Brennan's face went white. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keys. "Excuse me?" Judge Mitchell's voice was deadly quiet. "You heard me," Crawford spat. "You sit up there in your robes thinking you're better than everyone, but you're just another—" "Choose your next words very carefully, Detective," Judge Mitchell warned. But Crawford was past caring. 15 years of unchecked power, of operating in a system that had always protected him, had made him believe he was invincible. "You're just another affirmative action hire trying to tear down good cops who actually protect this city from children with aspirin." Judge Mitchell stood again. "From honor students waiting for the bus, from 17-year-olds with college scholarships. From thugs," Crawford shouted. "They're all the same. Doesn't matter if they can read or not. Give them a few years, and they'll all be dealing, stealing, or like Malik Thompson. What was he going to become that justified you executing him on the side of I-94? The word executing hit Crawford like a physical blow. His face contorted with rage. I didn't execute anyone. He was reaching for his inhaler, Judge Mitchell said quietly. His mother told me he was asthmatic, severely asthmatic. She gave me his medical records. Tell me, Detective Crawford, does an inhaler look like a weapon to you? The courtroom was dead silent. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to have stopped humming. Crawford stood frozen, his face a mask of fury, and something else, fear perhaps, for the first time. "You have no proof," he said finally. Judge Mitchell reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a tablet. "Technology is a wonderful thing, Detective Crawford. You see, while your body cam may have malfunctioned, the traffic camera at the intersection of I-94 and Martin Luther King Boulevard was working perfectly." Crawford's face drained of all color. "The footage is grainy," Judge Mitchell continued, "but the audio enhancement is remarkable. Would you like me to play Malik Thompson's last words for the court? Please, sir, it's just my inhaler. I can't breathe. Please don't shoot." Those were his words, Detective. "Shall I continue?" Crawford moved so fast that Officer Washington barely had time to react. He lunged toward the bench, his face contorted with rage. "You fucking bitch! You have no idea what it's like out there. These animals." Officer Washington intercepted him, but Crawford was bigger, stronger, and driven by desperation. He shoved Washington aside and continued toward Judge Mitchell, who stood her ground unflinching. "They're all the same," Crawford roared. "Every last one of them. And you're the worst kind because you forget what you are. You put on that robe and think it changes what you are." He was at the bench now, and what happened next would be replayed on news channels for months to come. Crawford drew back his leg and kicked Judge Mitchell with all his strength, his boot connecting with her ribs with a sickening crack. She stumbled backward, catching herself on her chair but didn't fall. The courtroom erupted. Women screamed. Officer Washington tackled Crawford from behind, but the detective was in a frenzy now, trying to climb the bench to get at Judge Mitchell again. "I should have killed you all," Crawford screamed as Washington and two other officers who had rushed in struggled to restrain him. "Every last one of you, starting with that Thompson kid. He begged like a little bitch before I put 3 in his chest. You want to know the truth? There it is. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching the light go out of his eyes." The confession, delivered in a moment of pure rage, hung in the air like poison gas. Angela Williams was sobbing, holding Keisha, who had buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Several other families in the gallery were crying. Some were recording everything on their phones, ensuring Crawford's confession would be preserved forever. Judge Mitchell, despite the pain in her ribs, stood tall. A thin line of blood trickled from where she'd bitten her lip, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Officers, arrest Detective Crawford for assault, civil rights violations, and murder. Make sure you read him his rights. We wouldn't want any procedural errors." As Crawford was being dragged away, still screaming obscenities and threats, the courtroom doors burst open. Special Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI walked in, followed by a team of federal agents. "Judge Mitchell," Agent Chen said, approaching the bench. "We've been monitoring this situation. Are you injured?" "I'll be fine," Judge Mitchell replied, though she was clearly in pain. "How long have you been investigating?" 6 months, Your Honor. Your sealed complaints to the Justice Department helped launch our investigation. We've been building a RICO case against Detective Crawford and his associates. His confession just made our job much easier." From where he was being restrained, Crawford's rage turned to panic. "Wait, what? You can't. I have rights. I want my lawyer. This is entrapment." Agent Chen turned to him with a cold smile. "Entrapment. You voluntarily confessed to murder in open court. Detective, you assaulted a federal judge, and that's just the beginning. We have warrants for Captain Morrison, Lieutenant David Brooks, and 14 other officers in your department. The corruption ends today." As Crawford was dragged out, his screams echoing through the courthouse halls, Judge Mitchell slowly sat back down, wincing at the pain in her ribs. The courtroom was in chaos, but she raised her gavel. "Order," she said quietly, and surprisingly the room fell silent. "The case against Miss Keisha Williams is dismissed with prejudice. All charges are dropped, and I'm ordering her record expunged immediately." Keisha and Angela Williams were crying, holding each other. But Judge Mitchell wasn't done. "Furthermore, I'm ordering a review of every single arrest made by Detective Crawford in the past 10 years. Any conviction based solely on his testimony is to be vacated immediately. The district attorney's office will coordinate with the public defender to identify all affected cases." Brennan, still in shock, managed to stammer, "Your Honor, that could be hundreds of cases." "Then you'd better get started, Mr. Brennan. Justice delayed is justice denied." As the courtroom began to empty, people approaching Judge Mitchell to thank her or express their support, she noticed someone sitting in the back row who hadn't moved. Eleanor Thompson. Malik's mother sat with tears streaming down her face, clutching a photograph of her son in his cap and gown from his high school graduation. Judge Mitchell walked down from the bench, each step painful from her injured ribs, and sat beside Eleanor. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "I'm sorry it took this long. I'm sorry I couldn't save him." Eleanor looked at her with eyes that had cried too many tears. "You got him to confess. After all this time telling me my baby was a criminal, that he caused his own death. You got that monster to tell the truth." "It's not enough," Judge Mitchell said. "It will never be enough." "No," Eleanor agreed, "but it's something. It's a start." As the two women sat together in the emptying courtroom, the echoes of justice finally being served reverberating through the halls, neither of them knew that this was just the beginning. Crawford's arrest would trigger the largest civil rights investigation in the state's history. The Blue Brotherhood that had protected him for so long would crumble, taking down corrupt cops, prosecutors, and even judges who had been complicit in the systematic oppression of black communities. The kick that was meant to silence Judge Diane Mitchell had instead become the shot heard round the world, or at least around the country. Within hours, the footage would go viral. Within days, protests would fill the streets demanding justice, not just for Malik Thompson, but for all of Crawford's victims. Within weeks, the entire Hamilton County Police Department would be under federal oversight. But at that moment in that courtroom, there was just a judge with broken ribs and a grieving mother sitting together in the hard wooden pews, finding comfort in the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds, truth wins. Sometimes the system, despite all its flaws and corruptions, can still deliver justice. Sometimes a single person standing up to power can bring down an empire of lies. As Judge Mitchell would later tell investigators, she had been building her case against Crawford for months, collecting evidence, documenting patterns, waiting for the right moment to expose him. She hadn't planned for it to happen this way. She certainly hadn't planned to be physically assaulted in her own courtroom. But Crawford's rage had been his undoing. In trying to silence her with violence, he had instead given voice to all his victims. The federal investigation that followed would reveal the true scope of Crawford's crimes. The traffic stop where Malik Thompson died hadn't been random. Crawford had been stalking him for weeks, angry that a black kid from the projects had earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university. The planted evidence in dozens of cases, the brutality covered up by falsified reports, the protection money taken from drug dealers in exchange for eliminating their competition, it all came to light. Captain Morrison was arrested at his daughter's wedding, led away in handcuffs in front of 200 guests. Lieutenant Brooks tried to flee to Mexico, but was caught at the border. 14 other officers were arrested in coordinated raids, their homes searched, their assets frozen. The trials would take years. Crawford would eventually be sentenced to life without parole for Malik Thompson's murder, plus additional consecutive sentences for civil rights violations, assault, conspiracy, and racketeering. He would spend his first night in federal prison in protective custody, ironically fearing for his life from the very population he had terrorized for years. But that was all still to come. In that moment, as the October sun streamed through the tall courthouse windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like spirits finally at peace, there was just the quiet acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted. The stone that Crawford had kicked loose with his boot would trigger an avalanche that would reshape law enforcement in Hamilton County and beyond. Judge Mitchell stood slowly, helping Eleanor Thompson to her feet. Together, they walked toward the courtroom doors, toward the media circus that was already forming outside, toward a future that, while uncertain at least, held the promise of change. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered as they reached the doors. "Don't thank me." Judge Mitchell replied, her hand on the door handle. "Thank your son." Even in death, Malik's truth was stronger than all of Crawford's lies. As they pushed open the doors and stepped into the hallway filled with reporters, cameras, and questions, neither woman looked back at the courtroom where it had all unfolded. They were already looking forward toward a tomorrow where Keisha Williams could return to school without fear, where mothers wouldn't have to worry about their sons being executed during traffic stops, where justice might not be perfect, but at least it would be pursued. The courthouse halls, which had echoed with Crawford's screams of rage, now hummed with something else, hope, perhaps, or at least the possibility of it. And in the end, that possibility, that hope for something better, was what made Judge Mitchell's broken ribs worth it. It's what made Eleanor Thompson's years of grief bearable. It's what made Keisha Williams believe she could still have a future. Justice, they learned that day, sometimes comes in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes it takes a kick to knock down a wall. Sometimes it takes violence to expose the violence that has been hidden all along. And sometimes, just sometimes, when a corrupt cop kicks a black judge in open court, he doesn't destroy her, he destroys himself, and everything he represents, clearing the way for something better to grow in its place. The federal agents moved through the courthouse with practiced efficiency, transforming the building into a crime scene within minutes. Yellow tape blocked off Courtroom 7A, while forensics teams photographed the blood droplets on the floor, where Judge Mitchell had bitten her lip, the scuff marks from Crawford's boots, the overturned chair where Officer Washington had tackled him. Every detail would become evidence in what Agent Chen was already calling the most significant civil rights case of the decade. Judge Mitchell sat in the courthouse medical room, wincing as Dr. Patricia Lawson, the on-call physician, gently probed her ribs. The pain shot through her side like lightning, but she kept her face composed, aware that several FBI agents were waiting to interview her. 2 cracked ribs, possibly 3. Dr. Lawson said, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "You need x-rays, Judge Mitchell. This could be serious." "Later," Judge Mitchell replied, her eyes fixed on Agent Chen, who stood in the doorway. "There's too much to do now." Agent Chen stepped forward, her expression professional but concerned. "Your Honor, we need your statement, but it can wait until after you've received proper medical attention." "No." Judge Mitchell stood, suppressing a gasp of pain. "Every minute we wait is another minute for them to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, or flee. I've been building this case for 6 months, Agent Chen. I'm not stopping now." Eleanor Thompson appeared in the doorway, still clutching her son's photograph. Behind her stood Angela and Keisha Williams, their faces a mixture of relief and concern. "Judge," Eleanor said softly, "Malik's cousin Deshaun is outside. He says he has something you need to see, something about Detective Crawford." Agent Chen's attention sharpened. "What kind of something?" Deshaun Harris was 23, tall and lean, with intelligent eyes that held the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust authority. He clutched a beaten laptop bag against his chest as he was escorted into the medical room. "Judge Mitchell," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "After Malik died, I couldn't let it go. Crawford said there was no body cam footage, but I knew that was bullshit. Sorry, I mean..." "It's fine, Deshaun," Judge Mitchell said gently. "Tell us what you found." Deshaun opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I work in IT for the city. I have access to certain servers, including the police department's cloud storage. They think they delete things, but nothing's ever really gone if you know where to look." The screen filled with file names, dates, timestamps. Deshaun clicked on one labeled M. Thompson, B02152024, backup. "They keep automatic backups for 30 days before permanent deletion," Deshaun explained. "But there's a ghost protocol that maintains emergency copies for legal purposes. Crawford didn't know about it. Most cops don't." He clicked play, and suddenly the medical room filled with the sound of Malik Thompson's voice, young and scared, coming through the laptop speakers. The body cam footage was clear, showing Crawford's view as he approached a modest Honda Civic on the side of I-94. "License and registration," Crawford's voice commanded. "Yes, sir, of course, sir," Malik replied, his hands visible and shaking as he reached for his wallet. "I'm just heading home from my job at—" "Shut up. Step out of the vehicle." "Sir, did I do something wrong? I was going the speed limit." "I said, get out." The footage showed Malik slowly exiting the car, his hands raised. He was thin, wearing a Target uniform with a name tag still visible. His breathing was audible, quick, and shallow. "Turn around, hands on the vehicle." "Sir, I have asthma. I need my inhaler. It's in my pocket. Can I—" "Keep your hands where I can see them." "Please, I can't breathe properly. It's just my inhaler." The video showed Malik's hand moving slowly toward his pocket, and then 3 sharp cracks. The camera angle jerked as Crawford fired, showing Malik crumpling to the ground. The boy's hand came out of his pocket as he felt a blue inhaler rolling across the asphalt. Oh God, please." Malik's voice was weak, getting weaker. "Mom! Tell my mom." Crawford's voice on the recording was calm, almost casual. Shots fired. Suspect reached for what appeared to be a weapon, requesting backup and ambulance. The camera showed Crawford walking over to Malik, who was still breathing, blood pooling beneath him. Crawford stood there for 37 seconds watching before kneeling down to check for a pulse. By then, Malik's eyes had gone still. The medical room was silent except for Eleanor Thompson's quiet sobbing. Agent Chen had her phone out, already texting her team. Judge Mitchell stood perfectly still, her injured ribs forgotten in the face of such clear evidence of murder. "There's more," Deshawn said quietly. He pulled up another file. "This is from 3 weeks before Malik died." The new footage showed Crawford at a bar with several other officers. The audio was muffled but audible. "Sick of these kids thinking they're hot shit," Crawford was saying, several beers evident in his slurred speech. "That Thompson kid walking around like he owns the place just because he got into some fancy college. Someone needs to teach him his place." Captain Morrison's voice was clear in response. "Be careful, Ryan. You can't just, can't I? Who's going to stop me?" "That affirmative action, Judge." "Please, I've got files on half the city council. Nobody touches me." Agent Chen paused the video. "Mr. Harris, how many of these recordings do you have?" "Hundreds," Deshawn replied. "Every arrest Crawford made in the last 2 years. Every traffic stop. Every interrogation. He thought he was deleting them, but I backed up everything after Malik died." "We need to secure all of this immediately," Agent Chen said. But before she could continue, her phone buzzed with an urgent alert. Her face paled as she read it. "What is it?" Judge Mitchell asked. "There's been an incident at the county jail. Crawford, he's dead." The room erupted in shocked voices, but Agent Chen raised her hand for silence, still reading her phone. "Apparent suicide. He was in isolation on suicide watch, but somehow the cameras malfunctioned. The guard was conveniently on break." "They killed him," Eleanor Thompson said flatly. "They killed him to keep him quiet." Judge Mitchell and Agent Chen exchanged glances. They both knew Eleanor was probably right. Crawford, alive and talking, was a threat to too many powerful people. "We need to move fast," Agent Chen said. "If they're willing to kill one of their own." Her phone rang. She answered, listened, and her face grew even more serious. "There's been a fire at the police evidence warehouse. 3 alarm. The entire building is going up." "They're destroying everything," Judge Mitchell said. "Every case Crawford ever worked, every piece of evidence that could implicate others." "Not everything," Deshawn said, clutching his laptop. "I have copies of all the digital files, and I uploaded everything to multiple secure servers last night. They can burn the building down, but they can't burn the cloud." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Captain Morrison was being escorted past in handcuffs, his face red with rage. He saw Judge Mitchell through the open door and lunged toward her, held back by federal agents. "You think you've won," he shouted. "You have no idea what you've started. This city runs on the thin blue line. Without us, without order, it all falls apart. You'll see. When the criminals run wild, when your people are begging for protection, you'll see what you've done." "Captain Morrison," Judge Mitchell said, stepping into the hallway, despite the pain in her ribs. "The only criminals I see running wild are wearing badges. The only protection this city needs is from officers like you and Crawford." Morrison spat at her feet. "You're nothing but a diversity hire playing dress-up in those robes. When this city burns, it's on you." As Morrison was dragged away, still shouting threats and obscenities, Agent Chen turned to Judge Mitchell. "We need to put you in protective custody. If Crawford is dead and they're desperate enough to burn evidence, you're in danger." "I'm not hiding," Judge Mitchell replied firmly. "There are dozens of families whose cases need to be reviewed, whose loved ones are in prison because of Crawford's lies. I'm not abandoning them now." "Judge, please," Dr. Lawson interjected. "At least let me take you to the hospital. Your ribs." "Tape them up here," Judge Mitchell said. "I'll go to the hospital when this is done." As Dr. Lawson reluctantly began wrapping Judge Mitchell's ribs, Keisha Williams approached hesitantly. The 15-year-old looked older than her years, the weight of recent events etched on her young face. "Judge Mitchell," she said quietly. "Thank you. But what happens to all the kids who weren't in court today? My friend Marcus, he's doing 5 years because Crawford said he found drugs in his locker. Marcus never even smoked a cigarette in his life." Judge Mitchell placed a gentle hand on Keisha's shoulder. "We're going to review every case, Keisha. Every single one. I promise you that." "The system doesn't just need review," a new voice said from the doorway. "It needs to be torn down and rebuilt." Everyone turned to see a well-dressed black woman in her 40s, carrying an expensive briefcase and radiating authority. "Veronica Lawson," she introduced herself. "Civil rights attorney from Washington. The NAACP sent me. We're filing a federal lawsuit against the Hamilton County Police Department, the District Attorney's Office, and the city itself. Judge Mitchell, we'd like you to be our star witness." "I'll do whatever it takes," Judge Mitchell replied without hesitation. The next hours blurred together in a whirlwind of activity. The courthouse became a command center, with FBI agents setting up computers and communication equipment in empty courtrooms. Deshaun worked with federal technicians to transfer and secure his backed-up files. Families began arriving, having heard through social media and news reports about Crawford's confession and arrest, hoping their own cases might be reopened. By evening, the scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. Agent Chen stood before a whiteboard covered in names, connections, and dates, briefing a room full of federal agents and attorneys. "Crawford was just the tip of the iceberg," she explained, pointing to various connections on the board. "We have evidence of at least 40 officers involved in systematic civil rights violations. They called themselves the Shepherds because they saw their role as keeping the flock in line." "Jesus," someone muttered. "They had a point system." Chen continued, her voice disgusted. "Officers got unofficial points for arrests of black suspects. More points if the suspect was young, educated, or came from a good family. They specifically targeted kids they saw as uppity or who they thought were getting above their station." Judge Mitchell listened from her seat, her ribs throbbing, despite the pain medication Dr. Lawson had finally convinced her to take. Eleanor Thompson sat beside her, both women, absorbing the full horror of what had been happening in their city. "Malik was worth 50 points. Chen said quietly. "Full scholarship, no record from a single-parent household. Crawford won a bet by killing him." Eleanor made a sound like a wounded animal. Judge Mitchell took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "How?" someone asked. "How did this go on for so long without anyone stopping it?" "Fear," Judge Mitchell said, standing despite the pain. "Fear and complicity. Every officer who tried to speak up was transferred, demoted, or worse. Every prosecutor who asked questions was shut down. Every judge who pushed back faced election challenges funded by police union money. The system protected itself. Until today, Veronica Lawson added. Today, the system broke. And it broke because one judge had the courage to stand up, and one detective was arrogant enough to kick her in open court. As night fell, the courthouse finally began to empty. The media had set up camp outside with news vans from every major network lining the street. The story had gone national with footage of Crawford's assault on Judge Mitchell playing on every channel. Judge Mitchell finally agreed to go to the hospital, but only after ensuring that all the immediate legal procedures were in place. As she was helped into an ambulance, she saw a crowd gathering across the street. Not protesters, not yet, but citizens holding candles, holding pictures of loved ones who had been victims of police brutality. In the ambulance with Dr. Lawson beside her, Judge Mitchell finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. The pain in her ribs was nothing compared to the pain she'd seen in Eleanor Thompson's eyes, in the faces of all those families who had lost sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, to a system that saw them as points in a game rather than human beings. "You did a brave thing today," Dr. Lawson said softly. "I did my job," Judge Mitchell replied. "For the first time in too long, someone in this system just did their job." The ambulance drove through the city streets past the burned evidence warehouse, still smoldering in the night, past the police station, where federal agents were still making arrests, past the neighborhoods where Crawford and his fellow officers had hunted young black men and women like sport. At the hospital, Judge Mitchell was treated for 3 cracked ribs and extensive bruising. As she lay in the hospital bed, finally allowing exhaustion to overtake her, she thought about Malik Thompson. She'd never met him in life, but his death had become the catalyst for exposing a corruption so deep it would take years to fully uncover. Her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. 14 more arrests tonight. The governor is calling for a complete review of all police departments statewide. You started something big. Your Honor. Judge Mitchell set down her phone and closed her eyes. She hadn't started anything, she thought. Malik Thompson had started it by having the audacity to succeed, despite a system designed for his failure. Keisha Williams had continued it by maintaining her innocence, despite pressure to plea bargain. Eleanor Thompson had sustained it by refusing to accept the lie that her son was a criminal. All Judge Mitchell had done was provide the courtroom where truth could finally speak louder than power. Crawford's kick had been meant to silence her, to put her in her place, to remind her that beneath the robes, she was still just another black woman who needed to learn respect for the real authority. Instead, that kick had shattered the blue wall of silence that had protected murderers and criminals with badges for decades. It had exposed the rot at the heart of Hamilton County's law enforcement rot that extended into the prosecutor's office, into city government, into the very foundations of what was supposed to be justice. The hospital room was quiet, except for the beeping of monitors and the distant sound of sirens in the night. Judge Mitchell thought about tomorrow, about the weeks and months ahead. There would be trials, investigations, testimonies. There would be threats against her life, attempts to discredit her, political pressure to back down. The system would fight back with everything it had. But there would also be families reunited as wrongful convictions were overturned. There would be young people like Keisha Williams, who could walk to school without fear of being arrested for existing while black. There would be mothers like Eleanor Thompson, who would finally have justice for their children, even if that justice came too late. The door to her hospital room opened quietly, and Officer Jerome Washington peered in. He'd been the one to tackle Crawford, the one who'd risked his career and possibly his life to protect her. "Your Honor," he said softly. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's someone here who insists on seeing you." Behind him, a young white officer stepped in nervously. He couldn't have been more than 25, fresh-faced, and clearly terrified. "Judge Mitchell," he began, his voice shaking. "I'm Officer Timothy Adams. I've been with the department for 2 years. I've seen things, terrible things, and I've been too scared to speak up. But today, seeing what you did, seeing you stand up to Crawford, even when he hurt you." The young man was crying now, tears streaming down his face. "I want to testify. I have recordings, documents, photos. I've been collecting evidence for a year trying to work up the courage to do something. I know about the Shepherds. I know about the point system. I know where the bodies are buried, literally in some cases. I want to help." Judge Mitchell studied him carefully. Trust would be hard to come by in the days ahead, but she saw something in this young officer's eyes that seemed genuine shame, certainly, but also determination. "Sit down, Officer Adams," she said gently. "Tell me everything." As Adams began to speak, his voice growing stronger with each revelation, Judge Mitchell realized that Crawford's kick hadn't just broken her ribs. It had broken the dam that had been holding back a flood of truth. And now that flood would wash away the Shepherds, the corrupt officials who protected them, and the system that had allowed them to flourish. Outside her hospital window, the city lights twinkled in the darkness. Somewhere out there, families were learning that their loved ones might come home. Somewhere young black men and women were realizing they might be able to drive, walk, exist without fear. Somewhere, corrupt cops were packing their bags knowing their time was up. Officer Adams spoke for 3 hours straight, his words painting a picture of corruption so systemic that even Judge Mitchell, who thought she'd understood the scope of the problem, found herself shocked. The young officer's hands trembled as he pulled out a small notebook, its pages filled with dates, names, and incidents he'd witnessed, but been too frightened to report. "They have a warehouse on Riverside Drive," Adams said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not the official evidence warehouse that burned tonight, but a private one. That's where they keep the real contraband, the drugs they skim from busts before logging them into evidence. Crawford ran it like his personal kingdom. Any cop who needed extra cash could take a package and plant it on someone. They called it shopping." Agent Chen, who had arrived at the hospital shortly after Adams began talking, was recording everything on her phone while simultaneously coordinating with her team via text. "We need that warehouse secured immediately," she said, already dispatching units. "There's something else," Adams continued, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool hospital room. "Crawford didn't kill himself. I know because Officer Danny Reeves called me an hour ago bragging about it. He said Morrison ordered it, said Crawford was about to flip and testify against everyone to save himself." Judge Mitchell pushed herself up in the hospital bed, ignoring the sharp pain in her ribs. "Are you willing to testify to this under oath?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'm done being a coward. My little sister just turned 15, same age as that Williams girl Crawford tried to frame. When I saw her in that courtroom today, all I could think was, what if it had been my sister? What if she'd been black?" The door burst open and Dr. Lawson rushed in, followed by 2 security guards. "We need to move you, Judge Mitchell, now. Someone called in a bomb threat, specifically mentioning your room number." As they quickly transferred Judge Mitchell to a wheelchair, Agent Chen was already on her phone barking orders. "I want this entire hospital locked down. Nobody in or out without federal authorization." They moved through the hospital corridors at a near run, Adams staying close, while clutching his notebook like a lifeline. Behind them, more federal agents arrived, sweeping the building for explosives. The threat would turn out to be false, but it sent a clear message that the corrupt network was desperate and dangerous. In the new secure wing of the hospital, surrounded by federal agents, the investigation continued through the night. Adams revealed more names, more crimes, more victims. The Shepherds had their tentacles in everything from the school board to the mayor's office. They had judges on their payroll, prosecutors who would throw cases, even reporters who would spin stories to make their victims look guilty. Judge Catherine Coleman, Adams said, naming a senior judge who had been on the bench for 20 years. "She's been dismissing cases against officers for years, always finding technicalities. Crawford brought her cash every month, $10,000 in a manila envelope. I saw it myself when I was assigned to courthouse duty." Judge Mitchell felt sick. She'd appeared before Judge Coleman many times as a prosecutor. Years ago had respected her, looked up to her even. To learn she was corrupt was like learning the foundation of the courthouse was rotten. Dawn was breaking when Veronica Lawson arrived with a team of civil rights attorneys. She looked exhausted, but determined, carrying boxes of files and legal documents. "We've been up all night preparing," she announced. "We're filing the largest civil rights lawsuit in American history, not just against individual officers, but against the entire structure that allowed this to happen. We're seeking damages for every family affected, but more importantly, we're demanding complete federal oversight of the police department for the next 20 years. Eleanor Thompson was with her, and she looked different somehow. The grief was still there in her eyes, but it had been joined by something else: purpose. "I'm starting a foundation," Eleanor announced. "The Malik Thompson Justice Foundation. We're going to provide legal support for every family affected by police corruption in this city. And we're going to push for Malik's law, requiring all police body cam footage to be automatically uploaded to federal servers, unable to be deleted or modified by local departments." As the sun rose over Hamilton County, the city was waking up to a new reality. The morning news led with Crawford's death, which the media was already calling suspicious. Footage of him kicking Judge Mitchell played on repeat, becoming a symbol of police brutality that would be remembered for generations. The federal raid on the Riverside Drive warehouse happened at 7 a.m. Agent Chen led the operation personally, and what they found exceeded even Adams' descriptions. Not just drugs, but weapons cache, and most disturbingly, trophies, personal items taken from victims. Malik Thompson's wallet was there, the one Crawford claimed he'd never found. Inside was a photo of Malik with his mother at his high school graduation, both of them smiling, unaware of what was coming. By noon, the arrests were happening so fast that the federal detention center was running out of space. Judge Coleman was arrested while eating lunch at her country club, dragged out in handcuffs while her wealthy friends watched in shock. 3 city council members were arrested in emergency session. The president of the police union was arrested at his daughter's school, causing a scene that would haunt his family for years. But the most dramatic arrest came when Captain Morrison, who had already been in custody, was charged with Crawford's murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Danny Reeves, the officer Adams had named, had already flipped and was providing detailed testimony about how Morrison had ordered him to kill Crawford and make it look like suicide. Judge Mitchell watched the news coverage from her hospital bed, surrounded by security. Her ribs were healing, but the doctors wanted to keep her for observation, especially given the continued threats against her life. Her phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, politicians, and civil rights leaders from around the country. One call stood out. It was from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson of the Supreme Court. "Judge Mitchell," the justice said, her voice warm but serious, "I want you to know that the entire legal community is watching what's happening in Hamilton County. What you did yesterday took incredible courage. You've started something that's going to reshape how we think about justice in this country." "I just did what any judge should do," Judge Mitchell replied, though she was deeply moved by the call. "That's exactly the point," Justice Jackson said. "You did what any judge should do, but so few actually do. You stood up to power even when it literally kicked you. That's going to inspire judges across the country to remember what our real job is: to ensure justice, not to protect the system." After the call, Judge Mitchell found herself thinking about all the judges who had looked the other way, all the prosecutors who had ignored obvious lies in police reports, all the officials who had chosen comfort over justice. She thought about herself too, about all the times before she'd started collecting evidence on Crawford, when she'd suspected something was wrong, but hadn't pushed hard enough. Officer Adams returned in the afternoon with more evidence, this time accompanied by 3 other young officers who had decided to come forward. They looked terrified, but determined, each carrying their own notebooks, their own recordings, their own burden of guilt for not speaking up sooner. "We called ourselves the Silenced," one of them, Officer Maria Rodriguez, explained. "Those of us who joined the force to actually protect and serve, but were threatened into compliance. Crawford told me on my first day that I could be a good little Mexican and keep my mouth shut, or I could end up like—" She paused, swallowing hard. "Like Officer Tyler Washington." "Tyler Washington?" Agent Chen asked, looking up sharply. He was Officer Jerome Washington's cousin, Rodriguez explained. Tried to report the Shepherds 5 years ago. His car went off a bridge 2 days later. They said it was an accident, but everyone knew. Judge Mitchell thought of Officer Jerome Washington, who had tackled Crawford in the courtroom, who had risked everything to protect her. The courage that must have taken knowing what had happened to his cousin was staggering. As evening approached, Deshaun Harris returned with his laptop and a flash drive. Judge Mitchell, I've been going through more of Crawford's deleted files. I found something you need to see. He pulled up a video dated 3 months ago. It showed Crawford in what appeared to be a private meeting with several men in suits. Judge Mitchell recognized one immediately District Attorney, Robert Stern, her former boss, the man who had recommended her for her judgeship. The Mitchell problem needs to be handled, Stern was saying in the video. She's been asking too many questions, pushing too hard on these cases. Maybe it's time she had an accident. Crawford's voice responded, "Give me the word and it's done. Make it look like a carjacking gone wrong. Happens all the time in those neighborhoods." "Not yet," Stern said. "But soon. If she doesn't back off, we'll have no choice." Judge Mitchell's blood ran cold. They had been planning to kill her. If she hadn't exposed Crawford in open court, if his rage hadn't gotten the better of him, she might have been dead within weeks. Agent Chen immediately dispatched units to arrest Stern, but he was already gone. His house was empty, his office cleaned out. He'd fled the moment Crawford was arrested, probably out of the country by now. "We'll find him," Chen promised, "no matter how long it takes." That evening, something unexpected happened. A crowd began gathering outside the hospital. Not protesters or media, but citizens, black and white, young and old, poor and wealthy, holding candles and signs that read, "Thank you, Judge Mitchell," and "Justice for All." Eleanor Thompson was among them, standing with Keisha Williams and her mother Angela. They were joined by dozens of other families whose lives had been destroyed by the Shepherds. But there were also white families there. Parents whose children had been saved from drug charges at Hamilton Prep, while black children were imprisoned for the same offenses, finally understanding the injustice of the two-tier system. Judge Mitchell watched from her window, tears streaming down her face. Officer Washington Jerome, the one who had saved her, stood beside her, having appointed himself as her personal protection. "You did this," he said quietly. "You gave people hope that the system can work, that justice is possible." "Crawford did this," Judge Mitchell corrected. "His arrogance, his hatred, his violence. He exposed what was always there. All I did was refuse to let him hide it again." Her phone buzzed with a text from Veronica Lawson. 63 wrongful convictions identified so far. Families are being notified tonight. You've given them their lives back." As night fell, Judge Mitchell received one more visitor. Marcus Thompson Malik's younger brother, a 14-year-old who looked so much like his deceased sibling that it took her breath away. "My mom wanted me to give you this," he said, handing her an envelope. Inside was a photo of Malik at his high school graduation and a handwritten note from Eleanor. "So you can remember who you fought for. Malik would have become something special. Because of you, his death won't be in vain. Because of you, Marcus and kids like him might have a chance to become what Malik never could." Judge Mitchell held the photo gently, looking at the bright smile of a young man who should have been in his freshman year at Howard University, who should have been studying, making friends, falling in love, living the life that was stolen from him by a man who saw him as nothing more than points in a sick game. The door opened again, and Agent Chen entered with a grim expression. "Your Honor, we've discovered something. The Shepherds weren't just operating in Hamilton County. We've found evidence of similar groups in 12 other cities. They were all connected, sharing tactics, protecting each other across jurisdictional lines. This is bigger than we thought." Judge Mitchell nodded slowly. She wasn't surprised. Corruption like this didn't exist in isolation. It was a cancer that metastasized throughout the system, spreading from department to department, city to city. "Then we'd better get to work," she said, pushing herself up despite the pain. "How many other judges are willing to stand up? After what happened here, More than you might think. Your stand is inspiring others to come forward. Judges who've been collecting evidence, but were too afraid to act. Prosecutors who've been documenting lies, but felt powerless to stop them. Officers like Adams, who've been waiting for someone to break the blue wall first. As Judge Mitchell stood at the window looking out at the candlelight vigil that had grown to hundreds of people, she thought about the kick that had started it all. Crawford had meant to break her to put her in what he saw as her place. Instead, he had broken the system's hold on the city. The news was reporting that federal oversight of the Hamilton County Police Department would begin immediately. Every officer would be re-vetted, retrained, or removed. The entire command structure would be rebuilt from the ground up. It would take years, maybe decades, to fully purge the corruption, but it would be done. More importantly, the story had gone international. Police departments across the country were scrambling to address their own potential shepherds before they were exposed. The phrase Crawford's kick was already becoming shorthand for the moment when institutional racism and police brutality finally went too far, when the system's violence against those seeking justice became impossible to ignore or explain away. Judge Mitchell's phone rang. It was the President of the United States. "Judge Mitchell," the President said, "I want to thank you for your courage. I'm establishing a federal task force to investigate police corruption nationwide, and I'd like you to lead it. Your country needs you." Judge Mitchell looked at the photo of Malik Thompson at the crowds holding vigil outside at Officer Adams and the other young cops who had found their courage at Eleanor Thompson, who had turned her grief into purpose. "I'll do it," she said. "For Malik, for all of them." As she ended the call, Dr. Lawson entered with her discharge papers. "Your ribs are healing well. You can go home, though you'll need to take it easy for a few weeks." Home. Judge Mitchell realized she couldn't go home. It wasn't safe, might never be safe again. She had made too many enemies, exposed too many powerful people. But that was okay. Her real home wasn't a building anyway. It was the courtroom where justice was served, the community that was finally being heard, the future that was being built on the ruins of a corrupt past. Agent Chen arranged for Judge Mitchell to be relocated to a secure federal facility where she could work on the National Task Force while protected from retaliation. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Officer Washington and the other officers who had come forward would be going with her, forming the core of what would become a new model for police accountability. The convoy of federal vehicles pulled away from the hospital at midnight, passing through the crowds who were still holding vigil. People pressed against the barriers, holding up their candles, their signs, their photos of loved ones who had been victims of the shepherds. Judge Mitchell saw them all, the faces of hope, of grief, of determination. As they drove through the city, she saw the changes already beginning. The police station was surrounded by federal agents. The courthouse was being swept for corruption. The evidence warehouse that had burned was being reconstructed with federal oversight. The system was being torn down and rebuilt piece by piece. But the biggest change wasn't in the buildings or the institutions. It was in the people. For the first time in decades, the black communities of Hamilton County walked with their heads high, knowing that someone in power had finally stood up for them, had taken a kick, and refused to fall. The young people who had lived in fear of being the next Malik Thompson now had hope that they could just be kids, could make mistakes without being murdered, could succeed without being targeted. The convoy passed the spot on I-94 where Malik Thompson had died. Someone had created a memorial, flowers, candles, photos, and a sign that read, "Justice for Malik Thompson finally served." Eleanor Thompson was there with Marcus and other family members, keeping vigil at the place where her son had taken his last breath. Judge Mitchell asked the driver to stop. Despite the protest from Agent Chen about security, she got out of the vehicle and walked to Eleanor, her ribs protesting with every step. The two women stood together at the memorial, looking at the flowers and photos. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then Eleanor reached out and took Judge Mitchell's hand. "He wanted to be a civil rights lawyer," Eleanor said quietly. "Said he wanted to fight for justice, to make sure what happened to his father in Iraq meant something, that his sacrifice protected the freedoms his father died for." Malik never got to become that lawyer, but maybe his death will create 1,000 lawyers, 1,000 judges, 1,000 good cops who will fight for what's right. It will, Judge Mitchell promised. I'll make sure of it. As they stood there, more people gathered. The other families from the courthouse. Officer Adams and the other young cops who had come forward, citizens who had heard about the memorial vigil on social media. They stood together on the highway shoulder, black and white, rich and poor, united in their determination that Malik Thompson's death would not be just another statistic. The convoy eventually continued on to the federal facility, but that moment at Malik's memorial had crystallized something in Judge Mitchell's mind. This wasn't just about prosecuting corrupt cops anymore. It was about rebuilding an entire system from the ground up, and that would require more than just legal action. The secure federal facility was a nondescript building 30 miles outside Hamilton County, surrounded by high fences and guard posts, but inside it was buzzing with activity. Federal agents, prosecutors, and analysts had transformed it into a command center for what was being called Operation Clean Sweep. Maps covered the walls showing connections between corrupt officers across multiple states. Computers hummed with databases being built to track every arrest, every complaint, every suspicious death involving the Shepherds and their affiliated groups. Judge Mitchell was given an office with bulletproof windows and a secure communication system. As she settled in, her first call was to Veronica Lawson. "We need to move fast on the civil suits," Judge Mitchell said. "Every day those families wait is another day of injustice." "Already on it," Veronica replied. "But we have a problem. Judge Coleman made bail, and she's been reaching out to other judges trying to build a coalition to fight federal oversight. She's claiming this is an overreach, that you're on a personal vendetta because Crawford assaulted you." Judge Mitchell felt her jaw tighten. Even now, even with all the evidence, Coleman was trying to protect the system that had protected her for so long. "Let her try," Judge Mitchell said. "We have Adams's testimony. We have the financial records Deshawn recovered. We have proof of every bribe she took." "That's not all," Veronica continued. "Robert Stern has been located. He's in the Cayman Islands, but they're refusing extradition. He's hired the best lawyers money can buy, and that money seems to be endless." Before Judge Mitchell could respond, Agent Chen knocked and entered. "Your Honor, we have a situation. 3 witnesses have recanted their statements against Morrison. They're claiming they were coerced by federal agents." "That's impossible," Judge Mitchell said. "I was there for Adams' testimony. No one coerced him." "It's not Adams," Chen explained. "It's 3 other officers who initially agreed to testify. They've all hired the same lawyer, someone named Richard Blackstone from New York. He's known for defending organized crime figures." The implications were clear. Someone with deep pockets was funding the defense, trying to build a wall around the remaining members of the Shepherds. Judge Mitchell pulled up Blackstone's information on her computer. His client list read like a who's who of corruption and organized crime. "They're treating this like a mob case," she said, "because that's what it is. The Shepherds were organized crime just with badges." Her phone rang. Her phone. It was Deshawn Harris, and he sounded panicked. "Judge Mitchell, they're trying to discredit me. Someone leaked my juvenile record from when I was 14, a shoplifting charge that was supposed to be sealed. They're saying I'm a criminal with a vendetta against the police." "Deshawn, that charge was dropped. You were a kid who made one mistake. It doesn't invalidate the evidence you found." "They're also saying I hacked the police servers illegally, that all the evidence I found is inadmissible." Judge Mitchell felt the weight of the opposition's strategy. They were going to attack every witness challenge, every piece of evidence, drag every supporter through the mud. It was scorched earth tactics designed to make the cost of pursuing justice so high that people would give up. But they had underestimated the resolve of those who had suffered under the Shepherds for so long. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. 37 officers from Hamilton County and surrounding departments arrived at the federal facility asking to speak with Judge Mitchell. Leading them was Lieutenant Patricia Hayes, a 20-year veteran with an impeccable record. "Your Honor," Hayes said, standing at attention despite being in civilian clothes. "We represent officers who have been fighting the shepherds from within for years. We've been documenting, recording, and collecting evidence waiting for the right moment. Crawford's assault on you was that moment. We're ready to testify, and we have evidence that goes back 15 years. Hayes handed over a thick folder. Inside were photos, documents, recordings, a parallel investigation that these good cops had been running in secret at great personal risk. "We call ourselves the Constitution Keepers," Hayes explained, "because we never forgot our oath to uphold the Constitution, not the thin blue line. We have 43 officers ready to testify and more coming forward every hour." Judge Mitchell felt a surge of hope. The blue wall of silence wasn't universal. There had always been good cops, but they'd been silenced by fear and intimidation. Now they were finding their voices. That evening, Eleanor Thompson arrived at the facility with unexpected news. "Judge Mitchell, we've raised $2 million in 12 hours, she said, tears in her eyes. "People from all over the country are donating to the Malik Thompson Justice Foundation. Small donations, $5, $10 from people who say Malik's story moved them. We can fund legal representation for every family affected by the shepherds." But the most significant development came when Officer Danny Reeves, the one who had killed Crawford on Morrison's orders, asked to see Judge Mitchell. He was in federal custody awaiting trial for murder, but his lawyer had negotiated a meeting. Reeves was a small man, unremarkable in appearance, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without noticing. But his eyes held a darkness that made Judge Mitchell unconsciously lean back when he sat across from her. "I want a deal," he said without preamble. "I'll give you everything, names, dates, locations, murders you don't even know about. But I want witness protection and a reduced sentence." "You murdered a man in custody," Judge Mitchell said. "You expect leniency." "Crawford wasn't the first," Reeves said quietly. "I've killed 4 people for Morrison over the years. All of them were threats to the shepherds. And Morrison wasn't the top of the food chain. You want to know who really runs this? I can give you names that will shock you. People in Washington, people you see on TV talking about law and order." Agent Chen, who was present for the meeting, exchanged glances with Judge Mitchell. This was bigger than they'd imagined. "We'll need proof," Chen said. Reeves smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I've got proof. Videos, recordings, even bodies you haven't found yet. Morrison thought he was smart, but I was smarter. I knew this day would come eventually, so I kept insurance." The deal was struck that night. Reeves would get witness protection and a 20-year sentence instead of life without parole. In exchange, he provided information that would lead to the largest corruption investigation in American history. The first bombshell came when Reeves revealed that Senator James Whitmore, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, had been receiving payments from the shepherds for years. In exchange, he had blocked federal investigations and appointed friendly judges to key positions. Judge Coleman wasn't appointed because she was qualified, Reeves explained. She was appointed because Whitmore knew she would protect the shepherds. There are 17 other judges across the country who were appointed the same way. The second revelation was even more shocking. The shepherds had been selling information from police databases to organized crime families. Names of informants, upcoming raids, witness protection locations, all for sale to the highest bidder. How many people died because of this? Judge Mitchell asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "At least 60 that I know of," Reeves replied without emotion. Informants who were murdered, witnesses who disappeared, cops who were ambushed because someone knew their patrol routes. As the scope of the conspiracy became clear, Judge Mitchell realized they weren't just fighting police corruption. They were fighting a criminal enterprise that had infiltrated every level of law enforcement and government. The next morning brought both good and bad news. The good news was that Senator Whitmore had been arrested at his home in Virginia, led away in handcuffs as news cameras captured every moment. The bad news was that 3 witnesses had been attacked overnight. 2 were in critical condition, and one officer, Maria Rodriguez, who had come forward with Adams, was dead shot in her driveway as she left for work. Judge Mitchell stood at the window of her secure office looking out at the gray sky. Rodriguez had been 28 years old, engaged to be married, planning to leave the force after testifying. Now she was dead, because she had chosen to do the right thing. "We need to move the witnesses into protective custody immediately," Agent Chen said, entering the office. "All of them." "That's over 100 people," Judge Mitchell pointed out. "Do we have the resources?" "We'll find them. The President has authorized unlimited resources for this investigation. He's calling it a matter of national security." That afternoon, Judge Mitchell received an unexpected visitor. Catherine Coleman, the corrupt judge who had been arrested, arrived with her lawyer asking to speak privately. Coleman looked different out of her robes, smaller, older, diminished. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red from crying. "Diane," she said, using Judge Mitchell's first name for the first time ever. "I need you to understand something. I wasn't always corrupt. 20 years ago, I was like you, idealistic, determined to make a difference. But the system breaks you down. The threats, the pressure, the realization that you can't win against them. So you make compromises. Small ones at first, then bigger ones, until one day you wake up and realize you've become everything you once fought against. You took bribes, Catherine. You sent innocent people to prison." "I know," Coleman said, tears flowing freely now. "And I'll live with that guilt forever. But I'm 71 years old. If I go to prison, I'll die there. I'm willing to cooperate to testify against everyone, but I need a deal." Judge Mitchell studied the older woman. Part of her felt sympathy. She could see how someone could be ground down by the system. But then she thought of Malik Thompson, of all the young black men and women whose lives had been destroyed while Coleman looked the other way. "I can't promise anything," Judge Mitchell said finally. "But if you provide substantial assistance, I'll recommend leniency to the prosecutors." Coleman nodded, seeming to age another 10 years in that moment. "There's something you need to know. Crawford's death wasn't just about silencing him. He had a safety deposit box with evidence that would have exposed people much more powerful than Morrison or even Whitmore. The key is hidden in his house, but be careful. They're watching it." That night, a federal team raided Crawford's house. What they found in the hidden safety deposit box would make national headlines for weeks. Photos of Crawford with 3 different presidential administration's officials. Financial records showing payments from foreign governments. And most damning, a recording of a meeting where the creation of the Shepherds was discussed and approved at the highest levels of government. Judge Mitchell listened to the recording in stunned silence. The voices on it included people she had admired, people who publicly championed civil rights, while secretly funding a system designed to oppress minorities. "This goes back 30 years, Agent Chen said, equally shocked. "The Shepherds weren't a rogue operation. They were policy. Unofficial, unwritten, but policy nonetheless. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't just about prosecuting bad cops anymore. It was about exposing a deliberate, decades-long conspiracy to maintain racial oppression through law enforcement. The media explosion was immediate and overwhelming. News channels ran 24-hour coverage. Protesters filled the streets of every major city. The president was forced to address the nation, promising a complete investigation and reform of federal law enforcement oversight. But for Judge Mitchell, sitting in her secure office, the weight of what they'd uncovered was almost crushing. How many Malik Thompsons had there been over the decades? How many families destroyed? How many communities terrorized, Eleanor Thompson called that evening. "Judge Mitchell, I wanted you to know that Marcus got accepted into Howard University's early admission program. Full scholarship, just like his brother. He says he wants to be a judge like you." Judge Mitchell felt tears sting her eyes. "That's wonderful, Eleanor. There's something else. We've had over 10,000 people volunteer for the foundation. Former victims, lawyers, activists, even police officers who want to be part of the solution. We're not just seeking justice for the past anymore. We're building a movement for the future." As Judge Mitchell hung up, she thought about Crawford's kick again. That moment of violence had been meant to assert dominance, to show that power would always triumph over justice. But instead, it had become the catalyst for the most significant civil rights advancement in a generation. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Officer Adams entered, but he looked different, older, wearier, but also more determined. "Your Honor, I wanted you to know that 17 more officers from my academy class have come forward. They all have evidence testimony. The young officers, the ones who joined to make a difference, were taking back our departments, city by city, precinct by precinct." "It's going to be a long fight, Timothy," Judge Mitchell warned. "I know," Adams replied. "But for the first time, we actually have a chance to win. You showed us that. When Crawford kicked you and you didn't stay down, when you kept fighting even with broken ribs, you showed us what courage looks like." That night, Judge Mitchell worked late reviewing cases, preparing for the trials that would consume the next several years of her life. The Shepherds had been exposed, but removing their influence would be like performing surgery on a cancer that had metastasized throughout the body of American law enforcement. Her phone buzzed with a message from Justice Jackson. "Watching the news. You've started a revolution. Judge Mitchell, history will remember this moment, and more importantly, it will remember your courage in the face of violence." Outside her window, she could see the lights of the city in the distance. Somewhere out there, families were reuniting with loved ones freed from wrongful imprisonment. Young people were walking the streets without fear of being targeted for their skin color. Good cops were finally able to do their jobs without fear of retaliation from corrupt colleagues. But also out there were those who had benefited from the old system, those who were even now plotting to restore it. The Shepherds had been exposed, but their ideology, the belief that some people deserved justice while others deserved oppression, that was harder to kill than any organization. Agent Chen knocked and entered one final time that night. "Your Honor, we've just received word. Robert Stern has been arrested in the Caymans. Apparently, the international pressure became too much. He'll be extradited within the week." It was another victory, but Judge Mitchell knew it was just one battle in what would be a very long war. The system that had created and protected the Shepherds had been built over centuries. It wouldn't be dismantled overnight. As midnight approached, Judge Mitchell finally prepared to leave her office. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new battles. But it would also bring new allies, new victories, and slow, incremental progress toward justice. She picked up the photo of Malik Thompson that Eleanor had given her, looking at the bright, hopeful face of a young man who would never get to fulfill his dreams. But his death hadn't been in vain. It had exposed a corruption so vast that it had shocked even those who thought they understood how bad things were. "Your life mattered, Malik," she whispered to the photo. "Your death mattered. And I promise you, we won't stop fighting until every young person has the chance you were denied." As Judge Mitchell left the secure facility that night, surrounded by federal protection, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a young prosecutor full of idealism, to a judge who had almost given up hope that the system could be reformed, to now a woman with broken ribs and a broken heart for her community, but with an unbroken spirit and an unwavering determination to see justice done. The extradition flight carrying Robert Stern landed at Hamilton County Regional Airport at dawn, 6 days after his arrest in the Caymans. Judge Mitchell watched from the federal facility as news helicopters captured the former district attorney being led off the plane in shackles, his expensive suit replaced by a federal detention jumpsuit. The man who had once wielded the power of prosecution like a weapon against the black community now shuffled between two federal marshals, his head down, avoiding the cameras. But Stern's arrival brought unexpected complications. Within hours of his transfer to federal custody, his lawyer filed 17 motions challenging everything from the jurisdiction to the admissibility of evidence. More troubling, 3 key witnesses suddenly developed memory problems, claiming they couldn't recall crucial details they'd previously provided. Someone got to them. Agent Chen said, frustration evident in her voice as she stood in Judge Mitchell's office. Stern still has connections, people who owe him favors or fear what he might reveal. Judge Mitchell was reviewing the latest threat assessment when her secure phone rang. The voice on the other end made her blood run cold. "Judge Mitchell," the electronically distorted voice said, "you've caused enough damage. Walk away now, or everyone you care about will pay the price. Your mother in Atlanta, your brother in Chicago, that nice young clerk who brings you coffee every morning. We know where they all are." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Judge Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as she set down the phone. This wasn't just about her anymore. They were threatening her family, innocent people whose only crime was being connected to her. Agent Chen immediately initiated protection details for Judge Mitchell's family members, but the message was clear: the remnants of the Shepherds were desperate and dangerous. That afternoon, Judge Mitchell made one of the hardest decisions of her life. She called her mother. "Mama, I need you to listen carefully," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Some men are going to come to your house. Federal agents. They're going to take you somewhere safe for a while." "Diane, baby, what's happening?" Her mother's voice was worried but strong. At 73, Patricia Mitchell had lived through the civil rights movement, had seen her husband beaten by police during a peaceful protest in 1968. She understood danger. "I'm doing something important, Mama. Something that's going to make a lot of bad people angry. But it's the right thing to do." "Then you keep doing it, baby," her mother said without hesitation. "Your father would be proud. I'm proud. Don't you let them scare you off." That evening brought the first major breakthrough in weeks. Deshaun Harris had been working around the clock, diving deeper into the digital records he'd preserved. He arrived at the facility with dark circles under his eyes, but excitement in his voice. "Judge Mitchell, I found it," he said, opening his laptop. "The financial web. Every payment, every bribe, every dirty dollar the Shepherds ever moved, and it leads to places you won't believe." The screen showed a complex diagram of financial transactions. Money flowed from seized drug assets through shell companies to offshore accounts, then back into the country as political donations, bribes, and payments for silence. "Look at this." Deshaun pointed to a series of transactions. 3 days before Malik Thompson was killed, Crawford received a payment of $50,000 from an account linked to a private prison company. They were paying him to create more arrests to fill their facilities. Judge Mitchell felt sick. Malik had died not just because of racism, but because his death was profitable. The school-to-prison pipeline wasn't just a sociological concept, it was a business model. "There's more," Deshaun continued. "I found communications between Stern and executives at 3 private prison companies. They had quotas. Actual quotas for how many young black men needed to be arrested each month to maintain their profit margins." The revelation added a new dimension to the investigation. This wasn't just about corrupt cops and racist policies. It was about a system that had monetized the oppression of black communities, that had turned injustice into a profitable industry. The next morning, the first trial began. Captain Morrison faced charges of conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and civil rights violations. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters, some demanding justice for the Shepherds' victims, others supporting the police and claiming the investigation was a witch hunt. Judge Mitchell was the prosecution's star witness. As she entered the courthouse for the first time since Crawford's assault, she paused at the entrance to Courtroom 7A. The bloodstains had been cleaned, the furniture replaced, but she could still feel the echo of that moment when Crawford's boot had connected with her ribs. On the witness stand facing Morrison's cold stare, Judge Mitchell recounted everything: the pattern of arrests she'd documented, Crawford's confession, the evidence Deshaun had uncovered. Morrison's attorney, Richard Blackstone, attacked her credibility relentlessly. "Isn't it true, Judge Mitchell, that you had a personal vendetta against Detective Crawford?" Blackstone asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "My only vendetta was against injustice," Judge Mitchell replied calmly. "But you targeted him, specifically gathered evidence against him in secret. Some might call that judicial misconduct. I documented patterns of civil rights violations that were being ignored by the proper authorities. When those authorities are themselves corrupt, what choice does one have but to gather evidence independently? So you admit to conducting your own investigation outside proper channels? Judge Mitchell met his gaze steadily. I admit to doing what was necessary to protect the citizens of this community when the system failed them. If that's misconduct, then I'm guilty, but I'd rather be guilty of that than complicit in murder. The courtroom was silent. Even Blackstone seemed momentarily thrown by her directness. Morrison's face had turned red, his jaw clenched with barely contained rage. The prosecution then played Crawford's body cam footage of Malik Thompson's murder. The courtroom watched in horrified silence as Malik begged for his life, as he reached for his inhaler, as Crawford shot him 3 times. Eleanor Thompson, sitting in the gallery, sobbed quietly while clutching Marcus's hand. When the video ended, the prosecutor asked Judge Mitchell a simple question. Why do you think Captain Morrison ordered Crawford's death? Because Crawford was going to expose the entire network, Judge Mitchell replied. Morrison knew that Crawford's rage had led him to confess in open court. He knew Crawford would make a deal to save himself. The only way to protect the Shepherds was to silence him permanently. Morrison suddenly stood up, ignoring his lawyer's attempts to restrain him. "You destroyed everything," he shouted at Judge Mitchell. 30 years of keeping the streets safe, of maintaining order, and you destroyed it all for what? For some thug who was probably going to end up dead anyway. The judge presiding over the trial, a federal judge brought in from another district, immediately held Morrison in contempt. But the damage was done. Morrison had shown his true face, the hatred and prejudice that had driven the Shepherds all along. As Judge Mitchell left the courthouse that day, surrounded by federal protection, she noticed Keisha Williams standing with a group of young people. They were holding signs that read, "Justice for All," and "Thank you, Judge Mitchell." Keisha broke away from the group and approached. "Judge Mitchell," she said, her voice stronger than it had been that day in court. "I wanted you to know that I'm starting a student group at school. We're calling it Students Against Systemic Hate. We're going to make sure what happened to Malik, what almost happened to me, never happens again." "That's wonderful, Keisha," Judge Mitchell said, feeling a spark of hope despite everything. "We have over 200 members already," Keisha continued. "And we're partnering with the Malik Thompson Justice Foundation. We're going to change things, Judge Mitchell. You showed us it was possible." That evening, Robert Stern's trial began with a shocking development. Stern had agreed to testify against everyone in exchange for a reduced sentence. The former district attorney, once the most powerful law enforcement official in the county, was ready to burn down the entire system to save himself. His testimony over the next 3 days was devastating. He revealed names, dates, and crimes that went beyond anything the investigation had uncovered. Judges who had been bought politicians, who had ordered specific arrests to eliminate political opponents. Business leaders who had used the Shepherds to intimidate competitors. It was never just about race, Stern testified, though his words rang hollow coming from a man who had profited from racism for decades. It was about power and money. The racial aspect just made it easier. Nobody questioned why we were arresting so many young black men. It fit the narrative people already believed. One name Stern revealed sent shockwaves through the investigation: Governor Patricia Hawkins, who had publicly supported police reform while secretly protecting the Shepherds from state-level investigations. She needed the Shepherds, Stern explained. They had information on her husband's business dealings, some questionable contracts with state agencies, so she made sure no state investigation ever got too close to the truth. Within hours of Stern's testimony, Governor Hawkins resigned, claiming health issues. But everyone knew the truth. The corruption had reached the highest levels of state government. As the trials continued, the verdicts began coming in. Morrison was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life without parole. His conviction triggered a domino effect. Officer after officer was convicted, some receiving decades in prison, others agreeing to testify in exchange for lighter sentences. But the most emotionally charged moment came during the sentencing of Danny Reeves, the man who had killed Crawford. Eleanor Thompson was given the opportunity to provide a victim impact statement, even though Reeves wasn't being tried for Malik's murder. "You killed the man who killed my son," Eleanor said, looking directly at Reeves. "But you didn't do it for justice. You did it to protect yourself and your fellow criminals. My son died because of men like you, men who saw him as less than human. I don't forgive you. I'll never forgive any of you. But I thank Judge Mitchell for ensuring you'll spend the next 20 years thinking about what you've done." Reeves showed no emotion, but Judge Mitchell saw something flicker in his eyes. Perhaps regret, perhaps just self-pity. 6 months after Crawford's assault on Judge Mitchell, the federal oversight of Hamilton County Police Department was fully implemented. Every officer had been reevaluated with 30%, either fired or criminally charged. New policies were in place, including mandatory body cameras that uploaded directly to federal servers, community oversight boards with real power, and strict penalties for racial profiling. Judge Mitchell, her ribs long since healed, but still aching on cold mornings, stood before Congress to testify about the National Task Force's findings. The chamber was packed with every major news outlet broadcasting live. "The Shepherds were not an anomaly," she testified. "Our investigation has found similar groups in 17 states. This is not a problem of a few bad apples. This is a systematic, intentional corruption of law enforcement for profit and power. It will take a generation to fully root it out, but we must begin now." She presented the task force's recommendations, federal oversight of all police departments, with histories of civil rights violations, mandatory reporting of all police shootings to a federal database, ending the practice of qualified immunity that protected corrupt officers, and dismantling the private prison industry that profited from mass incarceration. The response was predictable. Some hailed her as a hero, others denounced her as anti-police. Death threats continued to pour in, but so did letters of support from around the world. One letter stood out. It was from Marcus Thompson, written in careful handwriting. "Dear Judge Mitchell, I started at Howard University last week. I'm in the pre-law program. My professors know about Malik, about what you did. One of them said that sometimes justice requires someone to take a stand even when it costs them everything. You did that for my brother. I promise I'll spend my life making sure his death and your sacrifice mean something. Thank you for showing me that the system can change, even if changing it breaks you first." Judge Mitchell wiped away tears as she read the letter. The breaking had been real, her body broken by Crawford's assault, her sense of safety shattered by constant threats, her faith in the system she'd served nearly destroyed by learning how deep the corruption went. But from that breaking had come something stronger. A year after Crawford's assault, Judge Mitchell returned to Courtroom 7A for the first time as a presiding judge. The federal government had requested she oversee a special tribunal reviewing wrongful convictions from the past 20 years. It was fitting that it would happen in the same courtroom where Crawford's kick had changed everything. As she took her seat at the bench, Judge Mitchell looked out at the packed gallery. Eleanor Thompson was there, along with dozens of other families whose loved ones had been wrongfully convicted. Keisha Williams sat with her student group, now over 1,000 members strong. Officer Adams, promoted to lieutenant and leading the department's new Civil Rights Division, stood at attention in his dress uniform. "We are here," Judge Mitchell began, her voice strong and clear, "to correct the injustices of the past and ensure they never happen again. Each case we review represents a life disrupted, a family torn apart, a community betrayed by those sworn to protect it. We cannot give back the years that were stolen, but we can acknowledge the wrong that was done and work to make it right." The first case called was that of Jerome Williams, who had served 3 years of a 5-year sentence for cocaine possession before Crawford's corruption was exposed. The drugs had been planted, the evidence fabricated. As Judge Mitchell formally exonerated him, Jerome collapsed in tears, his mother holding him as they both sobbed. One by one, the wrongfully convicted were exonerated. Each name cleared was a small victory against the system that had destroyed so many lives. By the end of the day, 37 people had been formally exonerated, with hundreds more cases to review in the coming months. As the courtroom emptied that evening, Judge Mitchell remained at the bench, looking at the space where Crawford had assaulted her. The physical pain was long gone, but the memory remained not as trauma, but as a reminder of the moment when everything changed. Deshaun Harris appeared in the doorway. He now worked for the Department of Justice, using his skills to uncover corruption nationwide. Judge Mitchell, I wanted to thank you. If you hadn't stood up to Crawford, I never would have found the courage to come forward with what I knew. We all stood up together, Deshaun, Judge Mitchell replied. That's the only reason any of this worked. As she prepared to leave the courthouse, Judge Mitchell's phone rang. It was Agent Chen, now Deputy Director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Judge Mitchell, I wanted you to be the first to know. We've just arrested 17 members of a Shepherds-affiliated group in Texas. Your work here has given people the courage to come forward everywhere. The walls of silence are falling nationwide. Judge Mitchell felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The work would never truly be done. For every corrupt cop arrested, there were others still hiding. For every unjust law changed, there were those working to reinstate oppression through new means. But progress was being made slow and painful, but real. As she walked through the courthouse halls, Judge Mitchell passed the memorial that had been installed a plaque listing the names of all those who had died at the hands of the Shepherds. Malik Thompson's name was at the top, followed by 43 others. Below the names was a simple inscription, "Justice delayed, but not denied." Outside the courthouse, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. The protesters who had once filled the streets were gone, replaced by the normal bustle of city life. But something had fundamentally changed in Hamilton County. Young black men and women walked with less fear. Parents worried a little less when their children left for school. Good cops could do their jobs without fear of retaliation from corrupt colleagues. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect, but it was better. Judge Mitchell drove through the city past the spot on I-94 where Malik Thompson had died. The memorial there had become permanent, a small park with a bench where people could sit and remember. She saw Eleanor Thompson there, as she often was, talking to a group of young people about her son, about justice, about the importance of never giving up. The radio was playing news updates. 3 more cities had announced federal oversight of their police departments. The private prison company that had paid for Malik's death had filed for bankruptcy after losing federal contracts. The Malik Thompson Justice Foundation had helped free over 200 wrongfully convicted individuals nationwide. Judge Mitchell's phone buzzed with a text from her mother, now safely returned home after months in protective custody. "Saw you on the news again, baby. Your father would be so proud. Keep fighting the good fight." As she pulled into the driveway of her new home, the old one had to be sold after too many threats. Judge Mitchell reflected on the journey. Crawford's kick had been meant to break her, to demonstrate the power of the Shepherds over anyone who challenged them. Instead, it had broken. The Shepherds had shattered their power and exposed their crimes to the world, but the cost had been high. Officer Maria Rodriguez and 3 other witnesses were dead. Dozens of families had been threatened, forced to relocate. Judge Mitchell herself would need security protection for the rest of her life. The trauma inflicted on communities over decades couldn't be healed overnight. Still, as Judge Mitchell entered her home and prepared for another day of seeking justice, she knew it had been worth it. Every wrongful conviction overturned, every corrupt cop imprisoned, every young person who could now dream of a future. Without fear, they all traced back to that moment in Courtroom 7A, when Detective Ryan Crawford had let his rage override his judgment. The phone rang one more time. It was Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson again. "Judge Mitchell, the president has asked me to sound you out about something. There's going to be an opening on the Federal Appeals Court. He wants to nominate you." You've become a symbol of judicial courage, and he believes you could do even more good at the federal level." Judge Mitchell was quiet for a moment, thinking of all the work still to be done in Hamilton County, but also of the opportunity to effect change on a larger scale. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. But Judge Mitchell, the country needs judges like you. Judges who remember that justice isn't about protecting the system, but about protecting the people from the system when it becomes corrupt." After the call ended, Judge Mitchell stood at her window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, a young black man was driving home without fear of being pulled over for driving while black. Somewhere a mother was tucking her child into bed without wondering if they'd become another Malik Thompson. Somewhere a good cop was arresting an actual criminal instead of manufacturing one to meet a quota. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough until the system that had created the shepherds was completely dismantled and rebuilt. But it was a beginning. Judge Mitchell picked up the photo of Malik Thompson that she now kept on her desk at home, right next to a photo of her father, who had died fighting for civil rights in a different era. "We're not done yet," she said to both photos. "But we're getting there, one courtroom at a time, one case at a time, one act of courage at a time." As the city settled into night, Judge Diane Mitchell sat down at her computer to write her response to the president's offer. She would accept the federal nomination not for the prestige or the power, but for the opportunity to ensure that what happened in Hamilton County could never happen again anywhere in America. The last line of her acceptance letter read, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, especially when we have the courage to grab it and pull." Crawford's kick had been meant to silence her. Instead, it had given her a voice that would echo through the federal judiciary for decades to come. A voice that would speak for the Malik Thompsons of the world, for the Keisha Williamses, for all those who had been silenced by a system that was supposed to protect them. The transformation that had begun with an act of violence in a courtroom would continue spreading across the nation, changing laws, changing minds, changing the very nature of what justice meant in America. And at the center of it all was a judge who had refused to stay down when kicked, who had turned her pain into power, her assault into action, and her broken ribs into an unbreakable resolve to see justice done.